So Hannah Boggs I'm going to be interviewing her today. She is the owner and operator of Kingdom Gardens, which is in Rock Hill, South Carolina. We're neighbors. It's just down the street from me. Um, and if you're in the area, what you do is just head north on India Hook. And if you run into the lake, you've gone too far. Actually, right before you get to, if you're familiar with Westminster Park, you'll see her on the right. If you've ever driven that way, you already know what I'm talking about. You've seen her. You've seen her garden out there on the right. So, Hannah, thank you for joining me. And
Yeah,
yeah, it's good to have you on.
thanks. Thanks for having me.
So I want you to tell a little bit about your story, and I want you to we'll talk about the garden, we'll talk about everything that you do there. But I want to start back to what kind of got you started in the first place. Um, and so I'll let you decide where that is, and then just what got you into the mindset or the idea that you wanted to do this before you ever thought about Kingdom Gardens,
Right,
thinking about regenerative farming, thinking about farming at all. How did that start for you?
right. Um, so I have gardened a lot of my life, starting probably at 5 or 6 years old, just with no intention, just for fun. But I did grow up with a pilot dad, and my dad took us on a lot of international trips as really young kids. And I just fell in love with getting to experience other cultures. I was telling you that, like in fourth grade, we spent our time in Asia. And so definitely got, I guess, a bit of a travel bug. And as soon as I was old enough to travel alone, or maybe not even old enough, but as old as my parents needed me to be to let me travel alone,
How old was
I
that?
I had my first summer abroad when I was 15.
Wow.
And so I lived in Barcelona all summer when I was 15. And then really that was kind of the catalyst. From there, they just let me travel solo where I wanted, when I wanted, as long as I could prove I was safe and doing something reputable, and or it was an internship or a study abroad program or something. And so as long, and also as long as I could somehow figure out how to pay for it. And so that kind of is really what led me to farming, just because I was traveling all over the world and seeing just this deep connection to creation and to where our food comes from that people have all over the planet, but that I wasn't seeing back home in the United States of America. And um, yeah, just the way people know their farmers, go to the market every day, have their fresh bread delivered. Every place was a different story, but it definitely, the same story still prevails throughout, that people had this beautiful connection to the land that I desired to see for myself, but that as I got older have desired to see for my community also. And I could tell you story after story about what I've learned and how it led me to where I am today. But ultimately, it led me to starting my own farm, just slowly. Like you were explaining, it just starts with something small, and it's kind of a domino effect. Like I got chickens, and then I had a smaller garden, and then I got a bigger garden, and then I had three gardens, um, and it was all just really based off of a heart to educate my community about where their food comes from and help people understand that um, your experience connecting with the land can be something greater, that's what I've seen all around the world. So yeah.
Did you always think it was that you were going to be, when you started where you are now in Rock Hill,
Hmm.
did you always think that you were going to be selling produce to the community, or did it really start smaller for
Yes.
yourself and grow into that?
Yeah, it did start smaller for myself. So I really, man, it's really hard to say. I got a degree in political science, and as I've told your family, I was working in the politics field during the last major election in 2020, and was just emotionally drained and really just loved growing food. And at that point, I had grown a lot of food for my family, and enough of food where we had definitely plenty of extra, and was, dropping off zucchini on neighbor's doorsteps kind of thing.
Mhm.
And so I did see that farming could be a possibility as far as selling and giving it to other people. But originally, I was looking at maybe being a nonprofit of some sort or more of a community garden setup. And at the time, that just wasn't really feasible. And it just made sense to just, quickly do a sole proprietorship and just see what would happen. And it's kind of evolved from there. And I'm sure that it's going to be ever changing. We might be a community garden 5 years down the road or something. So I've just been letting the Lord kind of direct that, but have never had this clear one direction. I just know that what I'm doing today is where God wants me to be, and just we'll see from there. But yeah, it was definitely just started from me loving to grow food.
Yeah, so we'll talk more about we went on a tour of your farm and I want to hear you, give us a verbal tour in a little bit and we'll talk all about it. But first, just going back to your traveling, uh, I mentioned we people homestead for different reasons.
Mhm.
And, one of the reasons that has been important for us is nutrition. And so you know about Weston Price. I'll give a brief introduction for anybody who maybe doesn't know about Weston Price who's listening. But he was a dentist about roughly 100 years ago, and he was practicing in America, and he was seeing his patients just their teeth just falling apart, right? And he was trying to figure out why that was, and anyway, what he decided to do was travel around the world. And I don't remember if he had this idea already, if his hypothesis changed as he traveled, but what he did do was travel around the world and look at people that were living in indigenous places, eating indigenous diets. And so really just kind of they're not connected to the Western world and the diet that comes along with that. And interestingly, so he'd find those people, but then really what was helpful was family members that were maybe a few hundred miles away or less than that at maybe a port city where they were getting some of those Western, canned foods, processed foods in their diet. And so he would be comparing the health of these people that were living on indigenous diets and these people that were, just consuming lots of, processed food and sugars and things like that. Um, and realizing that these other people were just so much more healthy. And family members, so you have people with the same genetics that are you can compare the two. And I mean, there's a lot of on you could just search on YouTube. There's I forget what the name of it was, but there was one we watched a few years ago where there were two twin British doctors. They were twins. I don't know, stop me if you've heard of this, but they so again, very, very close genetics. They're twin brothers. And one of them goes and lives with, the Eskimos somewhere, and he's eating whale blubber. And basically, part of it was entertainment. It was gross and all that. But then, his other brother was just eating the regular stuff, or maybe purposely eating some really unhealthy things. But and then they would compare each other's vital signs, and this guy's just he's eating these gross things and but living a very active lifestyle for a month or 2 months or whatever it is. So similar stuff with what Weston Price was talking about. And there's a Weston Price Society. There's a website. They talk a lot about um, raw milk and other things. And so I
Mhm.
won't go into all of it. It's not a commercial for Weston Price, but what I'm asking you is in your travels, did you see some of this? Were you in places where you did see some of those differences between the the food lifestyle of people that you were with or nearby and noticing things about their health or their energy levels or just how they, lived closer to the land and how that affected who they were, their well-being in general. So do you
Right.
have any stories like that that could kind of shed some light on that in the modern day?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think there's a reason why people are always studying blue zones, right? Like people are wondering why some people around the world are living differently, living longer, that kind of thing. But even aside from that, like earlier we were talking about people in Uganda and how you had spent time in Uganda. I also lived in Uganda in 2018, and learned a lot about the food system there and the reasons why people are struggling to grow their own food, although they are very organic, local food minded. And just you and I both had the observation that people were very strong, although there was a lot of malnutrition, maybe even some starvation and that kind of thing. But I did find that, a lot of people who are on like a truly uh, local African diet, like eating a lot of meat, eggs, that kind of thing, were like really strong considering their circumstances. And that kind of said a lot. And um, I've been researching this for almost 2 years now, but really this big argument in our modern day society about whether or not farmers should be feeding the world. It's like farmers feed the world, or if farmers should be nourishing their local communities. And it's just such a nuanced conversation. But a lot of it, comes down to Africa. And I've just learned so much about the food systems that we have throughout the world and the reason why a lot of people who historically, like during the time when Weston and A. Price was traveling, if he was doing that today, I don't know that he'd find the same things just because of globalization and the way that we have really kind of tarnished some of those indigenous ways of life. And a lot of that, like, for example, in Uganda, the processed food that's just taken over the country that's imported from countries like the United States or like Germany. And there's this saying that I see kind of in the slow food movement about how it's cheaper to import cheap chicken from Germany than it is to empower local farmers to uh, raise the feed needed to feed their own livestock and their own animals. And so it's not really a topic of just starvation, malnutrition. It's really like an issue of poverty and the way our current global food system is set up that does not um, really empower local communities very well at all. And I see that even in our own country, but I've seen it all over the world. Seen people, I did a trek in Peru through indigenous communities in Peru that up until they say the past 20 years had no contact with the outside world, some of these small villages. And they, are still air drying jerky the way that they believe that they've been doing for 8,000 years. But they also have a whole stash of like potato chips now. And so, yeah, it's really interesting to read about the things that maybe researchers like Weston A. Price found 100 years ago that are slowly becoming not true because of the way that we are kind of inputting ourselves into the global food system. So I'm
Yeah.
not sure that that's where you wanted to go with that, but yeah,
No,
I've
that's
seen
fine.
a lot of things.
Yeah, no, that's interesting because as those untouched places in the world kind of disappear, as like you said, global impact and just they see it as most of the world just sees it as a good thing. They see it as convenience.
Hmm.
You're feeding the world, and that's part of it, right? Do we feed the world and we just send all this bulk? Some of it's not bad if you just, rice and beans or that sort of thing, but
Right.
you send this bulk food in, no matter where it is, people need food, okay. But as that sort of happens, maybe there, at least in America, so maybe we just come back to America for a second.
Hmm.
Um, what it's looking like is they're not untouched people, but there's people that are realizing, huh, maybe this isn't so good. Maybe we're not, maybe the way I've been eating or the way I was raised to eat or whatever it is maybe not the best thing. Um,
Right.
and there's varying different, and the thing is, there are varying people are at various points of that realization, even
Hmm.
people that are trying to be more health minded. And it's not necessarily, the end of the world. It's not, what am I trying to say? It might not be so terrible, how you've been doing it. And it's not that you have to be completely go the other direction. Um, but instead of having these untouched people that do, it's people that are doing it intentionally, right? So whether you, especially around here, doing it yourself is not easy, like I've already mentioned.
Yeah.
The more you get into it, the more you see that that's helpful. you see that that's enjoyable. You see that that might be more cost efficient. And so as you start to do more, and you can't just all start it all at once. You can't just have a vision of, oh, okay, I'm going to go, um, be a homesteader and produce 100% of all my food. Like that takes
Hmm.
a long, long time. And most of that, and not just time, but it's a journey in your mind. So you
Yes.
have to kind of get there, um, as a realization first. Um, so you saw a need. I mean, you're here in Rock Hill. You saw that there was a need for what you're doing in this community. There really isn't anything like that. I mean, there are farms, right, on the outskirts all around Rock Hill.
Mhm.
And they come in and you've seen them at the farmers market. You're at the Rock Hill Farmers Market. Um, but so talk before we talk exactly about the farm, talk to me about the need that you saw in the community.
Right. Um, so at the time, I it wasn't necessarily that I was focused on like growing organic food or regenerative food, whatever label you want to give it. Um, I just knew that I wanted to help people connect to where their food comes from, like I was saying. And a lot of the kind of agritourism events that I was seeing in our area were much like the rest of the US, like corn mazes and strawberry picking. And those are all so fun. Pumpkin patches, it's like the same top five that you kind of see, but I wasn't seeing much more than that. And really across the country, there's not a whole lot more than that on a popularity scale. And so I knew that I wanted a way to reach the public with agritourism that was a bit different than what I was seeing. And so that was one thing that I noticed we were kind of missing something more than just this once a year visit or twice a year visit to a farm to take some pictures and kind of call it. And so I definitely had an inspiration to host people here. But then also, I did very quickly notice that there were not a lot of organic minded farmers in this area. We are actually a no spray farm, which I can talk about. But when I showed up at the farmer's market that first year, I hadn't sprayed any of my produce just because I was a new grower and I wouldn't have known how. I had no idea. Just was kind of starting blind. But when customers would come by and ask me, "Are you organic?" I kind of did some math. I'm like, "Well, I guess I am the only organic minded person here." That's super interesting at that time. And so that kind of led me, maybe even in an economical sense, it just made more sense for my business to stand out by being no spray and staying no spray. So, and it definitely resonated with what I had seen around the world with people not having access to synthetic sprays and fertilizers, etc. It just made sense that, of course, I would follow that as well. But so I also did notice a huge need for that as well, because as people do become a little bit more aware of where their food comes from and weary about our current food system, people are really stoked to just find a no spray farm. Like, oh, well, that answers my questions. Like, I know that we no till, a lot of kind of hot topic buzzwords. They see our farm and it kind of takes all the questioning out of it. They don't have to worry. And
Mm.
so I knew that there was a need for a farm where people just didn't have to worry and just could like let their hair down.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, that's great. So, okay. So if anybody hasn't been to the garden, been to your farm,
Mhm.
you drive up and there's a big, beautiful vegetable and flower garden right there in the front. You've got a brand new, so you used to have the little mobile farm stand and it was
Right.
run by the honor system mainly, right? And
Right.
now you've got, what do you call it? Is it called a farm stand?
We
It's
call it a
gorgeous.
store, but
Yeah.
it's like a large stand
It's
that we
legit
can
and it's
close.
very, very good. It's very nice. So
Thank
it,
you.
yeah, no, you're welcome. If you haven't gone by, you all need to go see it. But so you're open a couple times. Tell us about that. When are you
Yeah.
open? What do you do?
We're in the fall and winter, we're only going to be open Wednesdays 10 to 12 and Fridays 3 to 5. And that's also just totally based on our heart for community. We could have very well had it open more hours, open honor system, but we've found that the tighter the hours, the more people come because they know there's a small window. It's kind of one of those like psychology things. If people can come Monday through Friday, they'll probably not make it Monday through Friday because you can always come another day.
Hmm.
But if you can only come during this one window that works for you every week, then you come.
Yeah.
And at least during the summer, it is a bit kind of slower right now. People are on fall break and, doing a couple other things. School started back. But like during the summer, everybody would come all at once. And although parking was sometimes a bit of an issue, it's, like 100 like-minded people from the community are there at one time. And so that was the intent behind kind of our hours and just helping our farm stay sustainable and not having to pay somebody, where you struggle to make ends meet as it is
Yeah.
when you're a beginning farmer. So that was also super convenient.
Yeah.
But yeah, when we have our store hours, we allow people to wander the farm a little bit, like within a certain range, and they can go in that roadside garden that you were talking about, and see where their food comes from, see all the flowers, the pollinators, the birds, just kind of enjoy your afternoon. We sell local popsicles. It's just a great way to get outside. A lot of people in our community don't get outside very often, and so I've really loved hearing stories of families who get to kind of connect with creation by coming to our farm once a week. It's really
Yeah.
great.
So for those of you that are like me, up until fairly recently, you just driven by. We used to go to Westminster Park and, play sports, or we used to do roar. Um, or they've opened there's a new city park down that way too on the left.
Right.
So if you've ever driven by there, you've seen her sign, you've seen that big garden that we're talking about, and recently the farm store. But if you haven't stopped in, you don't know that there's a whole lot more back there. So would you just walk us through, give us a little bit of, well, one thing at a time. I mean, when we took the tour, you went back, there's a whole nother garden, which was actually your first garden, right? When you
Right.
walk back behind, you can't see it from the road.
Hmm.
But there's another garden back there that you started in a small spot and then you expanded that. So talk a little bit about what you got going on back there.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. A lot of people, when we started the roadside garden, they thought it was a brand new farm, but we'd been farming for a while before that. And even now people come by and they're like, you do all this on this tiny little garden right here. But once you kind of go past behind the tree line, it opens up to several more fields. And we have a small garden where I started growing food during kind of lockdown of 2020. And that's when I finally decided to really get into farming. And we had started out, I think, on 6,000 square feet. And so that garden is back there, but we've since expanded it, tripled it. So it's kind of a field now, not necessarily just a garden. It's like a field.
Mhm.
And so we've got
Do you
that.
grow
And
all the
then
same stuff back there as you grow up in the front, or is it different stuff back
we
there?
do, we have to, because we have to rotate our crops. Since we're no spray, we have to be like super diligent about where things get planted, how often they're planted there. And
Hmm.
so it's this whole beautiful, hardworking system so that we um, can keep growing what we're growing and um, yeah, not take too much of a toll on the soil, all the things. But
Yeah.
yeah, so there's two of those fields, and then we did start a third one, but we've had pigs up on that third uh, growing field to kind of work the soil, and so we won't be able to plant that again for quite a while, just because of the pathogens and all that kind of thing. And so we don't expect to be growing there for a very, very long time. But we did, use animal integration in our other fields as well with sheep, and so we have really found that we haven't had to buy a whole lot of things as far as inputs go as a no spray farm and with livestock,
Hmm.
uh, and just the way that we kind of work with creation and these beautiful natural systems of how we believe everything's fearfully and wonderfully made, that we haven't had to buy a whole lot. And I think that might be one of the reasons why farmers like us like aren't necessarily doing it right, because we're not needing to buy a bunch of things in the kind of capitalist place we're living right now.
Hmm.
That doesn't make a whole lot of sense for people to promote farms like mine that are like honestly completely self-sustainable as far as working with creation. So it's super beautiful. You pass by a couple chicken coops of laying hens on the way, and we have 8 acres that we've currently been leasing for our forest raised pigs. So we do have pigs in the forest and we're needing to expand fencing for them. And then we also lease 8 acres where we have some broiler chickens right now for meat chickens, and they are going out on pasture in a few weeks. But we've had several tractors full this year, and just watching them nourish that pasture land that has been up until this point pretty much completely abandoned for, I don't know, like probably a couple hundred years, 100 years for sure. And watching that pasture come back to life is really beautiful. And just seeing the land teeming with life that otherwise was not, because I'd seen it before all of this. And I've watched the bird populations come back and the butterflies come back and all the insect life. Super beautiful. We have a beekeeper that keeps his bees on the farm. And because I originally was doing all the things, I was keeping the bees, I was raising the sheep, I was doing the chickens, and I was growing the flowers. And as I've grown the farm, being able to welcome other businesses and other people who are passionate about serving the Lord through their gifts on this land has been a big blessing. And so it's just ever growing, but we've been really fortunate to be able to have this location and this opportunity where we can lease more land and where we can grow to kind of meet the community's needs. So yeah, super beautiful.
Yeah. So tell us about how the dog ended up with the pigs.
Oh yeah. he
Where was
so
he
we
in the
have
beginning?
Right, we have a livestock guardian dog named Maverick. He's super cute. He a super cute, like 150-pound animal,
Yeah.
but he was originally supposed to be a guardian dog for our sheep and our chickens, but definitely for our sheep. We had a flock of sheep for a while, and he continually kept escaping out of the sheep pen wherever they were and running back home to wherever the pigs were. He had gotten like a taste. He'd been with a pig at some point, and long story short, he just made his preference very, very clear about which animals he wanted to protect. And we really did not have the energy or the knowledge to like circumvent that, whatever was
Right.
happening with
Yeah.
him in his mind. So yeah, he lives with sometimes 500-pound pigs and somehow holds his own, and he loves it. And if he ever, I mean, we've tried to put him back with chickens. If he ever gets out, he just cries and wants to be back in. If It's been honestly super great when we've had storms and pigs have gotten out. He just sticks with them wherever they roam and wander. So it's interesting for sure. I've never
Yeah.
seen anybody have anything like it, but he's pretty funny. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, when we took the tour, I wasn't sure who was more excited, my daughter to pet him or him to get to be petted by her. But
Right.
he was in there on the other side of the fence with the pigs, and it was, at least for right there, that wasn't going to happen.
Right.
Um, okay, well, good. So, uh, question. With all that's going on with those different systems and different area, and you've got the pigs working that new gardens plot,
Mhm.
um, and all of these things kind of working together. What can you share maybe some mistakes that you've made, lessons that you've learned with how all of that comes together that we could all benefit from?
Right. I mean, I was just thinking about that this morning. Just the like financial mistakes that I've made. I know so many people. I used to do like homesteading consultations and go around and help people get started and pre-baby. And I've just seen so many people invest kind of in the wrong things in the wrong places. And I've done that myself. I was just calculating the thousands of dollars that I probably mismanaged buying certain things that I thought I needed or that a podcast told me I had to have. And at the end of the day, like growing your own food is very simple. God gives you what you need. That's so true. Like we are given what we need. You might have to get some seeds, but it doesn't have to be super elaborate. And the barrier to entry is much smaller than you think. When I do give gardening classes, that I start out with mindset work. Like what is your limiting beliefs about growing your own food and homesteading, and what are the things that you're telling yourself? Do you think it's too expensive? Do you think you don't have time for it? Like, and all of these things, they're they're not true. They're not truths, whatever you're telling yourself.
Mhm.
And so in that way, I would just, I always push people to really just not try to like reinvent the wheel. Just go back to basics, and you don't need all the knickknacks and the gadgets. And of of course, as people learn to grow their own food, it's kind of another one of those money things. You go to Home Depot and they've got a gadget for everything, or a soil fertilizer for everything. And honestly, most of it's just trash, like, from my perspective. You don't need all the things, and just learning about the innate ways that our world works. And I believe it's the systems that God set up, but things like rotational planting, and if you have animals, rotational grazing, so that you don't have to, depending on your region, pay for hay all winter long. Just things like that, that the more you really connect to where the land, the earth, where your food comes from, usually the more seamless all of it becomes. Um, but yeah, just those like beautiful systems that we have. Um, yeah,
What about we didn't talk about this on the farm, but what about composting? Is there anything that you
right.
do? Is that have you been able to keep up with that? What do you do?
Yeah. Our composting, we've started it, stopped it. I think that next year we're going to start it again. But that's another thing that I just felt like it was extremely overwhelming. And I'd listen to podcast after podcast arguing about how to compost best. And oh my goodness, the amount of composting companies that have reached out with the gadget that solves your composting problems. It just kind of was like a red flag in my mind. But we truly just cover crop. That is what we have opted to do. So we buy cover crop seeds, and those are seeds that we do not save cover crop seeds. That would just be a lot for us. But
Mhm.
cover crop seeds solve a lot of the nitrogen
Mhm.
fertilization problems for us, and help us really nourish that soil super well, so that we are not having to bring in compost all the time. Actually, a lot of farmers, regenerative farmers like myself, that I know all around the country, they bring in compost every year. And that's kind of what the, podcasts tell you, all the farming podcasts tell you, add an inch of compost after every planting. And if we were doing that, we'd probably be losing a lot of money. For us, the cover crop seeds have been really, really fantastic, and just trying to keep our soil covered so that it's not eroding in storms, always having something planted. There's definitely ways to go around having to worry so much about compost.
Yeah.
But same thing with, planting things in different places every time, because broccoli always is going to leach the same nutrients out, but beans give nutrients that broccoli needs. So, planting beans before broccoli, that kind of thing. Getting we're not professionals at it by any means, like learning more every single season. But as I learn more and more about those kind of beautiful natural systems, that the like more I can get away from having to worry so much about things like compost. So
Mhm. Yeah. So one of the things that we talk a lot about is community. And this first little go around season, whatever you want to call it, of this podcast, I'm trying to focus on building community. And that's part of what, with all the interviews, you're in my community. I'm in your community. Although we didn't really know it that much.
right.
I probably knew it before you did. But let's talk about that. So how are you using the farm? Um, to build community. And I know you have events that you host.
Mhm.
But is there also some educational stuff? And if, or well, first let's start with what you have done and what you are doing as far
Sure.
as community.
Yeah. I started the farm right when I moved here. So pretty much other than people that I know from church, everyone I know in Rock Hill is through the farm.
Mm.
So just my own community I've seen just grow through the farm and the people that I get to meet and interact with. But just doing different things like we do operate on the trade and barter system for some people if they have something to bring to the table. And so that's been really cool. And getting to support other homesteaders and farmers through that has been awesome. And now that we have the farm store, we sell products from farms all around our area. And so when you come to my farm, you're not only supporting the farmers at my farm, but at farms all over the state, actually. And so it's just made this beautiful web of people supporting other people. But we do events and workshops, classes, that kind of thing. We just got finished with a tea party in the garden that I was telling your kids about that I thought was just so random. We called it Petals and Kettles, and it was a tea party with definitely a flower focus, beautiful arrangements by our flower farmer. And people just got to come and have a tea party, a beautiful meal in the very garden where their food was grown. And so things, just offering things like that for our community, basically at cost. We lose money on most of the things that we do,
Yeah.
but just making it so that it's something that can educate people and help people kind of bridge that gap and make that connection to where their food comes from. Uh, my gardening workshops have always been my favorite. Some people leave and they never garden and they keep letting those limiting beliefs stop them. But other people, they take me up on my 4 months of, I stay in touch with them for 4 months plus and help them troubleshoot their gardens all season after the workshops. And just watching people completely transform, learning how to grow like just a few things by themselves, but starting with nothing and no experience, no knowledge, and going from never having grown their own food to not buying vegetables at the grocery store for 2 weeks is you just see a personality change like no other when it's
Mhm.
just so empowering and beautiful. So just doing stuff like that for our community and of course offering the farm store, hoping that that's just a place where people feel like they can come and be outside, even if they're not doing their full week's grocery shopping there. Just being able to be there, and so that's super great. We also, I mean, just lots of things. We donate 10% of our produce. I used to say 10% of our profits, but we've got some loans we're paying off. So definitely a lot of our produce. This week I'm taking a ton of apples and cheese to our little local food pantry fridge, and that is something that by shopping at our farm, we're able to serve our community that way. We have kind of a bit of a refugee ministry, or definitely a bit of a refugee ministry going, where we have several families that we um, are friends with. I've been pouring into them through some local churches that we have been partnering with. They bake bread to sell at our store, at our markets. They sell their handmade napkins, different kind of kitchenware, that kind of stuff through our store, but also spend time in the gardens. The amount of kids that have been in and out of the gardens chasing butterflies is just like you could not imagine. Learning how to harvest green beans and cucumbers, and we grow some specialty produce that comes from Afghanistan that they can't find in stores here. Just little things. They're families whose husbands served alongside our military, and so they were some of the people that got to come here when they were being threatened back home.
Mhm.
So that's a big one for sure.
Yeah. Is there anything, have you done any of that? You've done plenty of that on your farm, where you are, but have you participated in any other things like that in the community, like in other places?
Like
Um,
as far as with refugees,
well, no, just educational stuff yeah, I'm more thinking like done any kind of workshops elsewhere.
right? Um, Honestly, not really. Aside from social media, I'm super active on social media and have offered online workshops before, and definitely have considered like posting them online. that way. But aside from my accounts, not yet. I've wanted to speak at different things and definitely do my gardening workshops. It just transforms the way you view gardening, but haven't had the opportunity to do a whole lot of that yet.
Okay. And you're still traveling, right? So where do
Right.
you what does that look like? Is that more just for enjoyment? Are you researching? What are you doing with that?
Yeah, that's probably also it's another one of those things where there's no clear path necessarily, but I'm just like as I feel that God's telling me to do something, I'll do it. But it really started with my social media account. I am really active on Instagram. It's Hannah at the Gardens, and just some opportunities, other people in other countries offering to host me and share with me. That was actually the trek I did in Peru was through a trekking company in Peru that hosted me for 2 weeks and took me on this trek through traditional herding communities.
Hmm.
And just because of my social media. And so some of that has been because of that, so that I can go and share what I've learned online. But I just, the more I learn about this great world of growing food, and really it comes from my political background as a politics major, but just really wanting to understand what's actually happening and kind of see change has really led me to want to continue traveling and keep learning and maybe try to, I don't know, can convince people that there's another way. And I know that we're all doing that in our spheres of influence. And for me, and just with my background of understanding cultures and a lot of my cross cultural work, I think that traveling just keeps coming up because it's something that's natural for me and it's where God keeps using me. But like I just got back from Switzerland 6 days ago, and spent the whole time learning about the dairies in Switzerland and the way that their country is very self-sustainable when it comes to their cheeses and their meats and their animal products, and just always learning a lot of really cool things. So I do continue to travel. I plan to always travel. That's something I say. Um, like I will continue farming however I need to be able to continue learning and visiting other farms.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So the dairies in Switzerland, you're speaking my language now. Do you have any plans to do any of that on your farm?
Not on my farm, but I would be totally happy to welcome anybody who wants to start a micro dairy. We, as I was saying, I love inviting other businesses onto the farm, and I'm constantly seeking out more people who just need the land to kind of do something. But as of now, we get our raw milk that we sell in the store from a farm, I don't know, 30 minutes away, and
Mhm.
our cheeses from actually from Greenville, some of our cheeses, but some of them from York, which is 30 minutes away also. But for me, adding any more to my plate is not currently in the picture. But yeah, if the more local cheese, milk, the better. Absolutely. We truly, it's super interesting. But the more I learn, the more I realize that we truly don't have that many farmers in our area. We don't have that many farmers in our state, in our region at all. When you go places like Switzerland and realize that every other person is farming, um, in many parts of the country, you quickly see that just because you're seeing cornfields on every side of the road for 3 hours driving, it doesn't mean that there are a lot of farmers. That could be one farmer, and it doesn't make our food system very safe and secure. It doesn't make us very food resilient, and even starting this store and trying to find farms to stock the store has been really, really tricky because there are not very many. So I'm in full support of all the homesteading, all the growing local food. Definitely, I think we can use more of it for sure.
So
So
are you looking to partner with even more farms, trying to find more farms to come and sell stuff at your farm store? And
yes, I use the word desperate. I am desperate to find more local farmers. And every week there's a farm called Wild Hope down in Chester. They're a certified organic farm. I send them, I bother them. I send them a desperate email every week. I am desperate for more produce. I am desperate
Yeah.
because with my current setup and my current team, it's just going to take a lot longer to be able to grow more food and kind of meet the demand. And there's not many of us. The next next farm up is in Matthews. We do partner with a farm called Two Creek that are 45 minutes away, but there's not a lot really close by.
Yeah.
So I'm desperate. Definitely. Anybody, even if backyard growers who are super natural minded have, extra zucchini, like they bring it by and we'll just trade, or I'll buy it from them and keep the store stocked that way. But definitely the demand is very high in, at least in our area, and with my current resources I can't meet it alone. It's definitely not a thing to even try to do alone anyways. It's community centered. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, hopefully this podcast might help with that. If there's anybody listening that you know, maybe you are producing more than you consume and you want to be part of this community,
Mhm.
partnering with Hannah, feel free to reach. How can people find you, Hannah, if they want to
Right.
just come by or learn more or actually, partner with you a little bit? How can they find you?
Well, they can come by during our store hours. I may not be there, someone else might be there, but definitely you can email me. It's Hannah, then the at sign, Hannah at thegardens.com, spelled out. Or yeah, on social media, we have a Facebook page for Kingdom Gardens. Just search us on Google. You'll find our website, and feel free to reach out. Definitely, we would totally appreciate it. And I love connecting with people in this community. Yeah, just like you. There's people, had four people come last week who had never heard of us, and they live 2 minutes down the road. So just trying to connect to the people that are here and reach them.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
thank you for all that you do. I mean, the energy is, I'm a little bit exhausted just hearing about all the things that you're doing. So I
Thanks.
appreciate people like you who are just passionate about this and because it is a challenge, right? There's a lot of people around that maybe they've seen you, but they haven't stopped in or they just don't know. So hopefully
Right.
this will allow people to maybe a few more people, or honestly, it's going to be more the people that are already like-minded but didn't maybe know,
Right.
haven't made that connection. So so hopefully that can help you out.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
Thanks.
yeah. I really appreciate your time. Thank you for coming on and
Of
sharing
course.
with all of this. Are you, so you said something about a paper. Is there a book in the future, maybe?
Yeah, it's one of those hard topics that's just so nuanced, and every day I'm learning more. And it is really political and really widely debated. So every time I think about posting it somewhere, publishing it somewhere, it's kind of this like fear of doubt, doubt creeping in. Like you don't know everything. There's always going to be, but that's how this topic is. There's always going to be things that I'm not going to know, or there's going to be missing sides. And so I'm slowly feeling more and more encouraged and like empowered to share it and just see what feedback comes. But like I'm like 2/3 of the way through one more book about it, and we'll see. I've been reading from both sides of the story, and this is a book that is very much pro large scale farming, and so kind of tweaking my argument a little bit. But definitely, I'm very passionate about it, and I do believe that supporting your local farmers is a very good first step. So
Yeah. Well, I would encourage you to keep looking into that. I mean,
yeah,
I think
thanks.
there's a lot of people that might think, well, somebody else is already doing that, so I don't need to do it,
Right,
whatever it may be. So if you're wherever you are and wherever the Lord's leading you to do, just go at it with all of your energy, and you are. It's
right.
exciting to see what you're
Thanks.
doing there from, in just a very short time. So
Right.
may the Lord bless you and continue to bless the things that you're doing on the farm.
Thank
Um,
you.
and if anybody wants to, find more, they can reach out. Again, it was Hannah@thegardens.com. You can email her or find her website. And there's, the Facebook account as well.
Mhm.
And you can see the homesteadguy.com. We've got some chicken coops for sale. So let me know if you're interested in that. or if you just need help, you can reach out to either Hannah or myself if you're in the Rock Hill area, and we'd love to talk to you. Thank you
Yeah.
all for joining us, and we'll catch you next
Thanks.
time.
Thank you.